Schleiss and Danthal for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. I'm here today to talk to you guys about my thoughts on the Apollo 11 VR experience. I know, the second I said experience, you guys probably tuned out, but let's hope not. We've been given a lot of experiences and tech demos, so people are really just wanting solid games on the PlayStation VR. And I can understand that, because we've been burned by things like the Martian experience and Viri VR. But I think Apollo 11 offers a little more than our usual quote-unquote experience. It's definitely got its flaws, but there were several moments where I was kind of in awe. I'm not sure what the price will be when it's actually released in the US, but I know on my UK PSN account I paid around $13.99 for it. That may seem expensive, but I probably spent an hour and a half playing the Apollo 11 experience, and for the most part I enjoyed my time. The weird thing about this experience was that part of the time I spent enjoying the content provided, and then the other part I was constantly thinking about what they could have done to enhance the experience. For example, using footage from President Kennedy's actual speech is how they start the mission, and one of the nicest touches that I noticed was while you're watching this speech on a projector screen, you could see little dust particles floating in the air, like you would if you were sitting next to an actual projector. And the house that you're watching the film in is decorated in vintage 1960s style. There was quite a few moments where I said to myself, once the mission started, that, man, I really feel like I'm in the shuttle. Whether it was a sense of speed when you look out the window, or your height above the earth, or the attention to detail with the hundreds of buttons that you see in the cockpit. One of the things that really stuck with me was looking back at the Earth during takeoff. It felt pretty realistic. And being able to actually use locomotion and walk on the moon was pretty entertaining. The developers used this time on the moon to teach you about different experiments that the astronauts brought with them on the actual mission. And you can also just use your time to walk around the moon using the jump button and entertain yourself as you float through the air. I won't detail every moment of the game. I know technically there's not any spoilers to be had because it's a historical event, but I still want to leave it at a minimum to ensure that people that do decide to shell out some cash for the experience still have a reason to be excited. On Steam, the experience actually has a 5-star rating, the last time I looked. But that's not to say the title doesn't have its flaws. There were several moments where I was taken out of the cockpit and placed in an overhead view, watching things from above as they happened. I think this was to save money on animating certain sequences, but I did find it to be somewhat immersion-breaking, because you're enjoying being part of the crew, and then all of a sudden you're pulled away. Sometimes you're pulled away while audio is playing, so you can listen to it, but at the end of the audio, it goes to the next sequence. Now, technically that's fine, but when you're playing it for the first time and you don't know how long the audio is going to be, there's a sense of confusion, like, okay, am I just supposed to hang out here or what? Also, I think they missed the mark on your character's body. And what I mean by that is you simply don't have one. At least 3 times during the experience, I found myself saying, man, this would be really cool if I had arms. My other complaint about the game is the way they implemented the graphics. I realize this isn't a AAA $60 game or even a AA $30 game, and that it is listed as an experience. So technically, that might give them a pass, but for my purposes, I'm not going to do that. Early on in the experience, you show up with the other crew members at the shuttle launch pad. The camera angle comes in from overhead, and you see a mock-up of the shuttle and the launch pad that's done in flat paint, so it looks more cartoony than it does realistic. The only thing that really saves it is the sense of size and scale that's there, so you'll probably still think it's pretty cool. The problem lies in the fact that around the shuttle and the launch pad is basically, it looks like they took an overhead view from Google Earth satellite view and placed it into the game directly. I feel as though there had to be a better option than that, because if you look up at the shuttle and think, man, I'm really here, this is awesome, it's definitely immersion breaking when you turn your head left or right and you see pixelated satellite images of land next to you. Aside from staying in budget, I'm not sure what the thought process was on that. I did appreciate that during the experience they used actual audio from the mission to make it feel authentic. There was even parts during the experience where you got to try and operate the shuttle and manipulate it into a docking station or even attempt landing on the moon. That sounds pretty cool, right? Well, it would be if the controls weren't so finicky. The part where you're told to connect to the docking station, I played at least 3 or 4 times because you had to properly line it up using a monocle, which was sort of cool, but then you had to adjust your speed so you didn't crash into it. Half the time I found myself either going slightly too fast, or I would stop completely before I got there, and either way you fail the mission. I get that they were probably going for realism, and that if you're one of these astronauts in charge of operating this equipment, it's not going to be a walk in the park. So in that sense, I guess they accomplished their goal, but I think when it comes to a VR experience, and someone has to struggle with controls, it kills any sense of wonder that the person might be having. By the way, all the controllable sequences are done using the DualShock 4. And this harkens back to my complaint about not having arms or a body. I mean, we could have used the motion controls to complete the operations, and it would have added to the immersion. Now, I saw some people talk about graphical bugs and hiccups with drift and things like that. I don't know if it was my camera setup or what, but I didn't experience any of that. So on that front, I think the developers did okay. When this comes out on the US PSN store, if it's priced at $10 or $12, I say go for it if you're a fan of history or space, or even if you just want a cool experience to show people who come over to your house that may be trying VR for the first time. The developers did miss the mark on some things, but they really nailed certain details of the experience enough that I think it warrants a purchase. Like I said in the beginning of this review, I spent about an hour and a half with the title, and I could even see myself playing it again just for the heck of it. It's important to note that throughout the experience you're given historical footage, historical audio, facts about the shuttle and the experiments the astronauts were doing, and when I finished playing through, I couldn't help but think that I want more of these educational VR experiences. I know for a fact that the developers of Apollo 11 experience are currently working on a Titanic one as well, so I'm hoping that that one is equally as enjoyable. Now, I know that people that go into this, taking it for what it is, will enjoy it. Is it a game? No, it's more of an experience. But in reality, it's even more than that. It's an educational tool that happens to be using virtual reality. And it makes a decent effort to give us something new on the PlayStation VR. This title is leaps and bounds better than a simple 360 video or a stereoscopic 3D experience. And it may not have quite the polish of something like the Joshua Bell experience, but it does land squarely in the middle of the spectrum, and in that way that it was presented, I think it's okay with me. So like I said, don't write this one off immediately. It is an experience, but it's not the typical one that we've been given thus far, and while it may not be worth $20, if you can get it for $10 to $12, I think it's totally worth it. And I think most people would have a great time with it, at least briefly. I feel like I've covered a good amount of the pros and cons of the Apollo 11 VR experience without giving the entire thing away, so I'll probably just leave it at that. But again, I would really like to thank Schleiss and Danthal for having me on the podcast, and if you guys want to know more about me and my blog or my YouTube channel, feel free to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/thehandicapablegamer for more information. Thanks, and I'll talk to you guys later.